Once you've finished fleshing a beaver, the next thing to do is properly stretch and dry that beaver. There's two main methods. One is boarding, which is kind of the traditional way, and the other is using hoops, and we've moved almost entirely to hoops, as you can see. So this video is going to be about how to hoop beavers or use hoops for drying beavers, and we're going to go over everything from when you pull that hoop out of the box from the manufacturer to when you're pulling a beaver off. We've got beavers at various stages in the drying process, so we're going to be able to do that. So we've got this large beaver that we just fleshed. I'm going to cover this up actually until we're ready to dry it, because we're going to start with a hoop that came right from the manufacturer. So when you get it from the company, these were purchased off F&T, Fur Harvesters Trading Post, and this is what they look like. They're round, they're tightened up, they come in a box. So you undo this wing nut. This wing nut runs the show. So we'll use this for some, maybe we'll use this down here. When you loosen this wing nut, you can move the wire around, and then you tighten it up and it keeps it in place. So beavers, we don't want beavers to be stretched as circles, right? We want them to be as essentially ovals for the fur market. So the first thing I'm going to do when I get my new hoop, I'm going to put my foot on the other side from my, the side that's moving here, and that's going to be my nose. That's going to be the top of the hoop. I'm going to crunch this down to a place that's an average beaver, say a 62, 64 inch beaver, and I'm going to put my hands on both sides. I'm going to pull up so that I'm making kind of that oval look, and that I've got a, the top where it's most neck down is at the top where the nose is going to be. So and we're going to do some tweaking once we get this beaver on the hoop. And this is a big beaver. And what happens with these hoops is you end up using them time and time again. You'll make these minor adjustments. I'm going to use my knee to bend it a little bit there, a little bit here, kind of trying to get that oval shape. And you make these adjustments over time, and you end up getting certain hoops that just fit certain sized beavers. Some of these that tightening is on the side, maybe a little more neck down. Some are a little more oval, but you just kind of tweak them as you go. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to hoop this beaver. Again, it's fleshed. We're going to start by getting our, excuse me while I shuffle around in this fur shed. So we have our hooks, and these are the hooks that come right from the manufacturer. When you buy a hoop, I think you get 100 hooks per hoop, which is pretty nice. I put them in the middle. I've got a soft piece of plywood here that I use to tack these in. When they come right from the shop, they're really, really sharp, and you can push them through the hide. But after 4 or 5 beavers, they lose their edge, and it can get kind of difficult. So what we've started doing is using a hammer with a soft piece of plywood, and just one little tap gets it through. So we're going to start nose, tail, and kind of just work our way around. One tap, one by each leg. Come down here. And the nice thing about hoops in particular is that they give you some adjustment period later on. Once that beaver's on this stretcher, I can make some final tweaks to the size of it. Whereas when you're using boards, once you have 10, 15, 20 nails in, you're either just committed to the size that it's going to be, or you're pulling nails out to resize things. So once I have that kind of general opened up look, I'm going to start filling in between. And when it's all said and done, if you're wearing gloves, they will get ripped during this process. When it's all said and done, we're going to want these to be about an inch and a half apart from each other. So kind of keep that in mind as you're going. You want it to be even. Now I can tell by lifting it up that I'm going to need some more space on this. So I'm going to open that up now, and we'll see again. I bet it's going to need to go even bigger. This is a large beaver. This was a 53-pound female that we caught towards the end of the season. You You can see she had this big wound right in the middle of her back, unfortunately. It's too bad, but it's just the reality of trapping beavers in the spring. They get really territorial, they get to fighting. And we'll show you how we address that on, with using this stretching method later to make sure that it dries as closed as possible. When it comes to drying, you want to dry all fur in that 50 to 60 degree temperature. You want it to be, come past, you want it to be, a slight breeze if you can, kind of that cool, dry place. Our fur shed runs too hot. It just does. We got a wood stove in here, and it's usually pushing 80. So we run a fan to try and keep things moving. Okay, so we're getting to a point now. I'm going to make one more round that's going to lock in that kind of 1.5 inch size frame. But again, it's a little too loose. And what I'm feeling for, I want there to be some give in this pelt. You don't want it to be stretched so tight or else it'll potato chip as it dries. So I'm just checking to see how much kind of play is left in there. I'm going to work myself around. Of course, we had to choose a big beaver that requires quite a few of these hog rings for the video, so you'll have to bear with me as I work my way around. But you can see it's quick. It's just one tap, moving on.
Is there any instance you'd prefer a wooden board over a hoop?
Yeah, so Riley's asking about, I don't know if people can hear because we have a microphone going. So Riley's asking about when would you use a wooden board? We use wooden boards for our smaller beavers, for things that are in that 42, 45 inch size. We find that these hoops, they just get a little tight for those small guys. So we keep some boards around that and really big beavers. And we still have a few inches left on this beaver. This beaver's probably going to measure at 70 inches. We still have some space for stretching. But if you were to hypothetically catch one that's 76, 78 inches, you may still need a board. Geez, you may need the side of your fur shed to put up that one. The other thing is you want to make sure that your face is centered and that your back legs are centered. So I'll sometimes kind of come back around, and you can move it a little bit to make sure it's right where you want it. All right, so that's it for the hooks. I'll take these off. And again, I'm going to check. So I'd like to get just a little bit tighter on that. So that's about, you want to be able to see your hands, and you want there to be some kind of concave in that pelt when it's all said and done. I'm going to take the back of my hammer, and I'm going to give that a real nice, good, tight squeeze, because as this dries, it's going to constrict on the wire, and if that's not tight, it'll pop open, and it'll open up. So that beaver's a little oblong in the back hips. So with my knee, I'm just bending out just ever so slightly to create more of the oval shape. And what I was talking about as far as lining these up, these aren't perfectly centered, these two legs. So I can just shift this whole thing over. Same thing up here. Move that around, make sure it's where I want it. Face is nice centered. All right, so now we need to close up our leg holes. You could dry it just like this, but we want to present this pelt as good as we can for the fur buyer. So for the front legs, I'm going to take a zip tie. I'm going to pull that leg right through and close my zip tie off. And then after, we'll show you, after a day, you're going to cut that off flush, and it leaves a really small hole in the pelt. And this is where you're trying to impress your fur buyer and make a really nice looking pelt. So you can get a couple extra bucks. Then for the back legs, we're going to close it up simply with some pins, some little pieces of wood. So put these underneath, and I want to close that into a line. So pin it in, and this is just some soft, like probably, I think this is aspen from a project we had going on. You know, when you get those little pieces that you would normally throw in the wood stove, keep them out for this part of the process. And that's going to dry just like that. It'll dry with a tiny little line. And you can do this right here. This is what you're going to want to do with any wound that you have. So this guy up here, you can see it's a fight wound. We didn't open that up with the fleshing knife. That just is what it is. So I'm going to find a piece of wood that fits that. Put it underneath. And I'm just going to close this up so that when it dries, it dries closed. And again, this is just for your fur buyer. You're trying to impress them. Oh, geez, of course I picked a piece of wood that. Trying to impress them with a pelt that has as little holes in it as possible. I don't think this piece of wood wants to stay. All right, hold on. That's going to dry just like that, and it's going to help to keep it, you know, closed as it dries. It'll just look a little bit better. Last thing I do is I take just a blunt knife and I just clean up. You know, there's going to be some fur, some dirt from your hands, and because I want that to be as pretty as possible. And probably the most rewarding part of this entire process is the final comb. So I'm going to comb this down. And get, you know, there's some little pieces of dirt and stuff from my table, but then I'm going to comb it back up. And combing it back up, what you're doing is you're standing the hair follicles up on themselves so that when they dry standing up, and, you know, when that leather locks them in, and it makes a fluffier, a heavier looking pelt. Again, this is for your presentation for the fur buyer. You want this to be as fluffy as possible. When they run their hands through that, you want it to feel really, really nice and smooth. You don't want it to be matted with, you know, wet fur, so you want this to be nice and dry. I mean, look how beautiful that is. There's another fighting wound, but still a beautiful, beautiful pelt. And while we're here, I got to measure this just out of curiosity. So you guys will have to bear with me. So we got 41.5. 70.5-inch beaver. It'll dry a little bit, might lose half an inch, but that's a darn nice, good-looking beaver. So that's how you put them up. Now they're up. Now what? So this right here is a beaver that's been drying for a day. So it's been on the hoop for a day. You can see that it's pretty well dry. There's some pockets of fat that still have some more drying to do. I will often, after one day, I'll take my back pins out, just because I need them for the next one. And you can see what that looks like, what those small little holes look like. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the front legs off flush. And this part, those, you could leave the back leg pins in for forever. But I highly recommend you cut these off after the first day or two, as soon as they solidify. But you'll see right at the intersection, it's not quite dried yet. You want to cut it off now, and I'm going to go right above that zip tie. Cut it off, push that back in. Look how small that little hole is. Looks a lot better than having a big floppy thing here. If you leave these to dry right till the end, you're going to end up with this just very, very tough piece of leather that's difficult to cut. And because there's so much pressure there, oftentimes you'll end up ripping kind of towards your edges, towards where that nipple is. So I like to cut those off after one day, and that's what you're going to end up with. But that's not quite done yet. We still need another day of drying, so I'm going to put this back on the rack. But I do have one that's been drying for, I think, 3 days. And it's about ready. Now you'll notice that this guy is a little puckered. It's because I let off some pressure. If you have a location to dry your fur that is not really hot, like our fur shed's too hot, so oftentimes these will bow a bit. I don't have any that are bowed like that, but and that's another nice thing about the hoops. If you over tighten a beaver on a board, it's gonna rip out from the nails. If you over tighten a beaver on a hoop, it just potato chips. And so this whole thing will be kind of bent, you know, like this, or the other ways. So if that starts to happen, I just let the pressure off. Boop. And that allows it to kind of reset, but still dry. It's a little wrinkly, but once you put it in your pile, those wrinkles will go away. So what I'm gonna do to take this off is kind of an important part. I already let the pressure off, and you can see that I already did this part of the process, but when this has a lot of pressure to it, and you let it go, it's gonna kind of pop. Well, you don't want it to pop up next to that next hook, because it's gonna rip it out. So I take a pair of wire cutters, and I just snip on that closest hook to the edge that's gonna be moving. Over here, same thing, snip, snip, and you won't see that in the final tanning. You know, you'll barely notice that it's there. But once that's opened up, I'm gonna loosen up the pressure, and I pull it in, and then I retighten it so that it's nice and loose. And then I'm going to take it and push down on it and just pop these off. Once enough of them come off, it'll want to just fall off. Of course, because there's a bunch of hooks, there's always one that wants to grab it right when you're about to pick it up. Look how pretty that is. That fur has been dried standing up. And even when you push it back, it's still fluffy. That's good for your fur buyer. And then I just take my hooks out. It's as simple as that. So again, that's, we've moved to hoops. We think that they dry a little bit quicker. We feel there's a little bit more leniency and leeway if you've got a hot area that you're drying fur. You've got a little bit of tweaking room while you're tacking them out in those final moments to change it just 1 inch or 2 inches. But yeah, that's how we use hoops. And that's kind of part of our system and some of the tips and tricks. And we wish you guys the best of luck if you try this method out.